Good morning. Welcome to the Science of Mind class here at CSLDallas. I'm Dr. Petra. We are in the chapter on the science of mind of spirit, and we are on page 84, the action of spirit within itself. And you know, every so often we have to read stuff, and then we have to stop and think about why did Ernest Holmes write things the way that he writes them, before we maybe can dive into what he is writing, what the content is. So we start out here at the very top of this page. God, the self-existent first cause, speaks, and it is done. His word is law. God is word, God is law, God is spirit. So one of the things we have to recognize is that when the Science of Mind was written, Ernest Holmes was writing in a culture that perceived itself as predominantly Christian, and that really used predominantly not only Christian language, but the typical grammatic language of he to mean everyone and she to mean women. And so the challenge, of course, is the translation from the original Hebrew, Aramaic, Hebrew into the Latin and Greek, which all have nouns that are either masculine, feminine, or neuter. And so when you translate a noun that's masculine into English, which does not have masculine or feminine nouns, you end up with a masculine pronoun. So in German, the word Gott, der Gott, is the article der tells you that Gott is masculine. It's a masculine word. Doesn't necessarily mean the thing itself is masculine, but it's a masculine word. And there are lots and lots and lots of languages that have this these aspects to them. Most of them are Romance languages and Slavic languages. They all come out of Latin and Greek. And so they use this. And so we have this, this transliteration that happens where a pronoun becomes a particular gender when we're not 100% certain that the noun actually is gendered. So in some languages, the sun is male and the moon is female, actually often. But there are other languages when it's the reverse. The sun is female and the moon is a male noun. Not that they themselves are male and female. So we have lots and lots and lots of things going on when Ernest Holmes starts passages, paragraphs, and chapters using very traditional language, God and he. As we go through this particular section and then go on into the next section, how do we understand its operation? We'll notice that very quickly Ernest Holmes starts putting parentheses behind himself, and in parentheses we'll say itself, or say change the word God, God is this, God is that, or God as this, and then begins to drop out the word God. And so we see this continual movement to divest ourselves of preconceived ideas. More than anything else, the shift in language is to help us divest ourselves of preconceived ideas, particularly pre-critical ideas that we simply absorbed as children. Whatever faith tradition we grew up in, or just the culture that we grew up in. And so you'll also see if you read the body of the Science of Mind work, as you start getting into the work that was written in the 40s, 50s, and especially in the 50s, you see the language has become almost completely devoid of these words that come out of that particular mindset or that particular worldview or that particular way of thinking and speaking. So there's the caveat. We know that it's not how we necessarily talk about it today. We're very sensitive to the fact that it doesn't actually include half the human race. and we're not certain that God is actually a masculine deity. So we can put all of that to bed and aside as we carry on with what it is that we're actually trying to understand. The action of spirit within itself. So the first couple of paragraphs, the first paragraph really talks about this idea that that there is the impulse, spirit speaks. Of course, we've already said that spirit doesn't speak, right? Nor does it think. It's a movement in consciousness. We might say spirit has an impulse, spirit moves, spirit directs. We're not certain that there's actually a mouth that is speaking, right? So we're going to hold that metaphorically. Spirit knows itself, and the law is the servant of spirit, and is set in motion through its word, through spirit's word, the word that it's speaking. Notice that the word is capitalized, which also means it's not a word like I'm speaking words right now. It's a capital W, which always tells us that it's an absolute spiritual idea or quality, not a human one, not one that's in the physical world. Anytime it's capitalized, we're always talking about something in the intangible, causal reality. Law does not know itself, only knows how to do. So we have spirit as the impulse, as the word, and the law, which knows how to do. So then we go on to, did God make law? Well, so that would mean that there was a creator, and then the creator said, well, I need a way in which creation is going to come about. And from a metaphysical point of view, that would be like saying, well, the sun decided that it was going to produce energy, and it needed to decide what kind of energy it needed to produce. So it dreamed up producing photons of light, like as an intentionality, something specific. But the moment that we have that kind of reality, like a sun, like all of those nuclear reactions going on, we have in that moment photons of light. And the photons of light behave the way that they behave because of what they are. It is impossible to think of a time when law did not operate. It is impossible to conceive that it was ever created. Therefore, law must be coexistent and co-eternal with spirit. It is part of the causeless nature of the divine reality. We're going to get into some, so just bear with us here, right? The point of this paragraph is that the way in which the infinite becomes the finite is part of the nature of reality. It didn't get created separately. It's part of the nature of reality. So therefore, law must be coexistent and co-eternal. Okay, the next section. Spirit operates through law, which is some part of its own nature. So the law is part of the nature of spirit, universal spirit, this thing we call God, this infinite reality. The word of spirit moves through the law, and since the law must be as timeless as spirit, we cannot think of a time when law was not, or a time when it would cease to be. Neither can we imagine the law ever failing to operate once it is set in motion. Why? Because it was never created separately. It is a function of the infinite reality. It's the way the infinite reality, it's the nature of its. Okay, well, I'm going to use a word to define a word, so that's not going to work. I was going to say it's the nature of its nature. Can't really do that. So I'm trying to think of so here's how I think about these things. I always try to think about, okay, is there anything in my understanding that helps me get a hold of this? Okay, so I always like to go to mathematics. So the nature of reality is that if you put two numbers together, you will always get more numbers. And we express that as the law of addition. Was the law of addition ever created outside of there being things that we could put together. Right? We're simply describing the way it works. If you put 5 apples and 4 apples all in a bowl, you are going to get 9 apples. We did not have to create the plus sign. We did not have to create the law of addition to know that there are 9 apples. Does this make sense? Does this, right? So it's the nature of the way in which we manipulate the things that we want to know how many we have. In the same way, law is coexistent. It's just a part of the nature of reality, the nature of this infinite spirit. So it didn't start, it doesn't end, and it can't not operate. You can't put 4 apples and 5 apples in a bowl and say the law of addition has disappeared. I can't figure out how many there are because the law of addition doesn't work. In this particular moment, the law of addition has abandoned me. Right? It's but silly.
Sometimes that happens.
Well, but that happens in our brain. True. But if you actually put the 4 apples and the 5 apples together in a bowl, the law of addition is still there. Do you see? It's simply a description of how you get to 9. It's not like somehow it was created. Okay, it's just a description. So we have then an infinite spirit and an infinite law, intelligence and the way it works. God working through law which is unfailing and certain. Creation, the activity of spirit. The activity of God, the activity of spirit. The passing of substance into form through a law which is set in motion by the word of spirit. That is a description of our teaching symbol. Right there. Creation, which is the activity of God, rephrased, the activity of spirit, right? Starting to change that word over. The passing of substance into form through a law which is set in motion by the word of spirit, by the impulse, the intention, however we understand that causal movement. Remember, the word is capitalized. So when we're doing our spiritual work and we're doing our spiritual work in our spiritual mind treatments and in our spiritual work where we set an intention and we speak the word, we're not speaking our words. We're speaking the word, the causal word, because we understand the operation, the nature of reality and the operation of how an impulse, a directive impulse, becomes an outward form. Okay. Now, I hope you all had coffee this morning, okay? Holy mackerel. So here comes the Mobius strip, right? Here comes the Mobius strip. This is the last paragraph in this section. The whole action of spirit must be within itself. Okay, so notice 3 paragraphs later, the word God is abandoned and so is the word he. Or at least we're opening ourselves up to something beyond what those words might mean. The whole action of spirit must be within itself, upon the law, which is also within itself, and upon the universal stuff, which is also within itself. The 3, in reality, are one, the Trinity. The whole action of spirit must be within itself, upon the law, which is also within itself, right, which is its nature, how it creates, and upon the universal stuff, which is also within itself, which is basically, I like to call it the Play-Doh. It's the Play-Doh from which all things are made. And it's not yet something, so it's not even energy. It's not yet anything. It's pre-anything. So the closest analogy we can currently come to, it's the quantum field before it has popped into particularization. Yes, I know quantum field still has waves and things like that. So it's, anytime we use a physical analogy, it's going to break down. But we can see that double layer, right?
Is that kind of like if you have a thought, like having the thoughts that you have in your mind, and then the
attaching to it. But before you attach to it, it doesn't have any power.
And so let's bring a microphone up here. We've got a question. We use the microphone so the people online can hear you. Okay, it's not for the room necessarily. And please say your name and say it again. Say your question again.
My name is Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy.
It's nice to see you again, Ms. Peacher.
Nice to see you.
Very nice. So my question was, is that the same as when you have a thought? Like when our meditation practice, we learn how to detach ourselves from our thoughts because they are our own until we actually attach to them. Is that the same as it not having power until we actually attach to it and speak it aloud?
I'm not. So I have to really think about how you phrased what you understand attachment to mean. I don't know that I teach or understand meditation in exactly the same way. So I'm not exactly sure that it's a complete that we're talking using the same map of how it works. So I would say that the attachment for us is our energetic acceptance of the thought, right? How powerfully we believe the thought to be true. Mm-hmm. And then, yes, as we believe the thought to be true, that turns it into a causal word, yes, as opposed to, gosh, I wish it wouldn't rain today, or, right, that sort of wishful hoping or even fearful thinking that has no energy. If that's what you mean by attachment, yes. When we're talking about it from ourselves, from this here, we're now talking about it from the universal point of view, right? And so every word that Spirit speaks, every movement in consciousness, impulse of creation, is spoken with conviction, because in Spirit there can be nothing but truth.
Yes.
Right? So when there's that movement, then creation happens, and the law isn't turned on or turned off, right? The law is just operating because that's the nature of reality. Yes, and we're going to get to how do we participate in that. So thank you for your question. Great question, Jeremy.
Thank you for your answer.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to get to the more questions here in a moment. So this whole sentence is all about the nature of the oneness. It's so over and over and over and over again. We have to remember that while we talk about spirit, law, and body, spirit, soul, and form, it's never three things that are separated and somehow we're bringing them together. It's three aspects of this infinite reality that we call God. So what that means is that included in God is the physical universe, all of creation. And included in it is the way in which the Word becomes creation, all part of the whole. None of it is outside of the whole. Now, Ernest Holmes will go on to say, which I think is a really powerful nuance, is that not every experience is caused by spirit. Because we can certainly cause messes that are not causal, but they are still that are not caused by spirit. They're actually caused by us and all the ways in which we attach to false thinking. So we're going to talk about that later on. This is purely about the nature of all of reality. All right, and so there is something called God that makes things out of himself, or itself, in parentheses, by becoming the things it makes according to law and order. So spirit is becoming the things it's making. You and me and trees and stars and quasars and quarks and black holes and other things living in other multiverses and expressing at every level of dimensions of consciousness that we can imagine, by becoming the thing it makes according to law and order. And so as nearly as the intelligence of the human race is able to judge, spirit creates by contemplation, right? By contemplating its own nature, the nature of love, or the nature of being, becoming, all of those sorts of things. So we're going to stop there and see what other questions we have. Questions in the room, questions out there online. We're going to say good morning to Richard, Patrick, and to Ryan. Good morning, Ryan. Let's see what's going on out there.
Hey, good morning, Dr. Petra, and hello to everybody here in the room and everybody online that's joining us all over the world via Zoom and or Facebook. I see some friends over there in the Philippines, so good evening to you guys as well. And we, like Dr. Petra said, have an engaging discussion. And so there's a couple of housekeeping rules with that for the folks here in the room. If you want to go ahead and raise your hand, and obviously you met Patrick. Patrick is going to be helping us today with the microphone. And I also have our rock star over here, Richard, who's on the camera. So we want to say thank you for them for participating today. And for the folks there in Zoom, you can always hit the raise your hand icon located down below, and I can call you into the room, or feel free to put your questions and comments inside of the chat, and I can read those out loud. And the same goes true for all of those who are watching us on Facebook Live today. Go ahead and put your comments in the chat. And I like to just remind everybody that I keep the chats anonymous, so that way we can continue to keep growing in a safe container of spiritual growth. But after all that said and done, I don't see anybody here online yet so far. So I do see somebody here in the room, so let's go to you real quick.
Hi, I'm JL.
Good morning, JL.
Good morning. So I personally never really believed in the Trinity, right? I understood it the same way you sort of explained it. What I didn't understand, because God was always so separate from me and others, that we are all part of the totality of that. And I think having that understanding that they're not that it's all working together, that we're all part of this whole, is what has really benefited me.
Beautiful. Yeah, thanks, JL. And we got another comment on up here. But so the other thing I want to say too is that, of course, the Trinity is ubiquitous in spiritualities, right? So we have the spirit, soul, and body, or spirit, law, and body, however you want to say it. In the Christian tradition, the loose way that would go together would be Father, Holy Spirit, and Son, right? Because Son is the incarnated expression of the Father. When you see me, you see the Father. And in Hinduism, we have Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, and Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, right? In the same kind of, they sort of line up similarly over and over and over and over again when religions are seeking, or spiritualities are seeking to describe the nature of the totality of reality. It tends to have a trinity somewhere involved. And yes, it's challenging because if it's all out there, we wonder sort of why do we care, or how does that work? It's also interesting to notice that when we are looking at all kinds of things that describe the human experience, most of those descriptions, psychologically and lots of other ways, are in derivatives of 4, 8, and 12. And so the 4 square, right, which of course is in sacred geometry exactly the representation of the physical universe, and the triangle is always in sacred geometry one of the symbols of the higher consciousness. Of course, the circle is the whole, but it's so fascinating. Over and over and over and over again, you can see. And so if it's something that has a 3 in it, like describing it in a 3, we might suspect that it's describing something more on that whole spiritual nature. And if it has a 4, some kind of a 4 items, 4 pattern, it's often associated with the human condition. It's all these things are just fascinating. All right, we'll come back here and then we'll see what's online. Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, Petra. So based on the excerpt, what is saying, the whole action of spirit must be within itself upon the law. and upon the universal stuff, which is also within itself. Forgive me, I mean, I have,
That's okay.
God is helping me with words. But isn't that the same as the experience that we go through, like in terms of as above, so below?
That's what's being described here, is the Hermetic teaching as above, so below. But it's always an interesting conversation. Can we think philosophically about the principle of all of these things without automatically including ourselves? That's what we're trying to do here.
Can you explain that more?
Well, we're going to get to describing what that means for us.
Okay.
Right? Because it's like first of all, we want to understand the law of aerodynamics before we get into a plane.
Yes.
Right? We want somebody to actually play with the law of aerodynamics, crash a few times, and figure out the principle so that it will fly. And then we have to, of course, get ourselves to go, if I get into that little box or that little tube that's going to go up in the sky, that it's actually going to work for me,
yes.
Right? But first, somebody has to work, discover, understand, and use the principles. So what we're doing right here is practicing thinking about the principles without applying it to us at the moment.
Creating the foundation.
Yes, creating the foundation. Then we're going to get to what does that mean about us.
Yes.
And we will get to that. The whole middle section of the book is about that. But right now we're sort of looking at the philosophy, the theory, the principles, because ultimately we want to be able to apply it to ourselves with knowledge, not apply it to ourselves because somebody told us to.
Yes.
Right? We want to understand what we're doing. I really want those people who are building those planes to understand what they're doing, especially when they create new planes with shorter wings and wings that do different things. And right, I want them to know what they are doing. No question. All right, Ryan, I'm coming back out to you. If we have any comments out online, or you can raise your hand if you have something you want to share.
Yeah, I do. I see Marjorie. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and join us?
Hi, Marjorie. It's always nice to hear from you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Good, just checking. Yeah, this is I just love this stuff. And I'm trying to kind of put in my own understanding of things that I have learned about conscious evolution and different things that I've learned since Holmes. And I think it all works, but it's a little bit kind of like I have to sort of put some things in or kind of just try to understand. So when he talks about how a spirit is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and yet what we've learned in evolutionary terms that that God can only do for us as us, and that we are in co-creation with Spirit, so that and it works through the law, and the law is changeless or timeless. So it's kind of like I have to sort of put into my own thinking and understanding of the law is not something that is like what we typically think of a law that comes down from above or whatever.
Right.
And it's the same, and it never changes, because I think that since we are co-creating with Spirit and with God, and things are forever more and more complex, so that we can evolve God as God is evolving us. So it's not a question exactly, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you might think about that.
I think I totally 100% agree with you, what you're saying. You're just 3 chapters ahead.
Okay.
Right? So one of the things that's so lovely about doing this work, and is so lovely about the patient way in which the science of mind unfolds itself, is all of the things that you just said make sense. Let me see. I want to go back to the idea that we're building a foundation. And so there are going to be lots of times that we're going to leap ahead, right? Because again, we're immediately talking about ourselves, right? That we're doing this and we're using the law and we're evolving, right? And so what we're trying to do is, the first thing we're trying to do is exercise our ability to think about the nature of reality without humanity being the center of that. Because we're actually not the center of it. And so just like we could talk about stars, if we were physicists, we can talk about chemistry without immediately thinking about humanity. Ultimately, we are going to think about how does it affect us, how does it apply to us, but we can't actually do that until we actually understand the principles or the foundation of these sciences somewhat in their native state, right? And so that's what we're attempting to do here. And we are going to get to, Marjorie, exactly what you say, because it's called process theology, and Ernest Holmes alludes to it more than once in The Science of Mind when he talks about emergent evolution. And it makes some metaphysicians absolutely crazy. This idea that as we grow in consciousness, we are in fact evolving the infinite, because this is actually in the individual self-aware, self-knowing expression of itself that's been individuated. That is actually what then evolves God, what evolves the whole. So, but we can actually talk about it before that kind of self-consciousness has arisen. All of evolution has been designed for consciousness to create an organ in which it can see itself. And the moment that it has created an organ in which it can see itself, then we have a whole nother ball game going on. That's the whole second section of the science of mind. But we actually aren't the center of the universe. I'm so sorry to say. We're not the center of the universe. Unlike, that was the Copernican revolution, wasn't it? The Earth isn't the center of the solar system. We aren't the center of the universe. Everything doesn't revolve around us. So here is the challenge. The challenge right now, while we're working through these chapters, is to always start the sentence from the universal point of view as opposed from the human point of view. When we are in application, we're going to start with, well, but when we do experience, learn, grow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to get there. But right here, we're going to work to always start these sentences, these explorations from a universal point of view. Very similar, this is the sort of science part of the science of mind, very similar of the way in which we do that when we work with any of the sciences. We start learning the principles, we start discovering them, and then ultimately we may not be the center of the universe, but we're clearly the center of our universe, right? And the most interesting thing ultimately is, and what does this have to do with me, right? How does it apply to me? Is it going to apply well to me? Is it going to apply poorly to me? Is it going to help me? Is it going to hurt me? That is without a question going to be ultimately the most interesting thing, the thing we're most interested in. But we're going to challenge ourselves to do some philosophical thinking from that universal point of view. And that's the project that the science of mind begins with, and what is happening here at the beginning of this lovely philosophical text. Thanks, Marjorie. So hang tight. When we get to body, we'll really start talking about what you're talking about. And then when we get into causation, in the second section, you can just start looking, if you have a search function in your science of mind, just start looking for the words evolution and emergent evolution, and you'll see we're going to get there. All right, anything else going on out there, Ryan?
Yes, I'll ask this last question that's coming in here through the chat. does consciousness exist apart from humanity?
Oh, see, once again, we've put ourselves into the center of the
Right?
universe.
Yeah.
Right? Let's see. So let's go back. What do we need to go back? A million years. Do we have Homo sapiens a million years ago? Not Homo sapiens. What do we have? Homo erectus and Homo something else. And then before that, okay, so we got to go further back. Lucy was 7 million years ago. I can't remember. Oh gosh, now I have to go look up a whole nother set of pieces of information. So let's go back to the Jurassic period. There are mountains, there are rivers, there are trees, there are dinosaurs. There's the beginning of mammals. They're little itty-bitty things that can barely make it. The only reason mammals survived was because the dinosaurs didn't. Is there consciousness?
Yes.
I love it the way the Hindus speak about it, right? Because I think that if the science of mind were being written today, it would be called the science of consciousness. And we would understand that every time Ernest Holmes uses the word thought and mind, what he means is a movement in consciousness. They didn't use that language back then. This is the language that they had. Actually, psychology, psychoanalysis was just breaking onto the scene, which actually gave them these words: consciousness and mind and thought. We would today call it, I think, the science of consciousness. If I were rewriting this book, that's what I would do. But the Hindus they're way, way, way ahead of us. And the translation of some beautiful pieces of Vedic scripture is: consciousness sleeps in the rocks, waves in the grass, moves in the animal, and awakens in the human being. We would have obviously say in any sentient being, anywhere where consciousness is awakening. And what does that mean? To become aware of of a self. That there's a self here that is actually impacting one's own life, right? And then we go on to learn more and more and more and more about that. But the ultimate description of the whole, of this infinite whole, for many, 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 many people, is consciousness. In the Science of Mind, in the book, he uses the term intelligence. Because again, consciousness was not a word that was being used the same way that we do today, or as ubiquitously. But he's pointing to that with intelligence, right? Not something that is intelligent, but the actual quality of intelligence. And so consciousness, yes, does not rely on the human being. What Marjorie is alluding to, we will get there, I promise you, that consciousness is not self-conscious of itself as consciousness until an organ has been evolved that can do that. And we think of that as self-aware, sentient beings, wherever in this galaxy or this universe or any of the multiverses that emerges. Now we have individuated consciousness that can now see itself, right? And be conscious of consciousness and go, wow, there is something amazing going on here. Let's learn about it. Let's discover it and learn about it. And so, yeah. All right, comment, and then we're going to close. Quick, short, and I'll have a short
Okay.
answer, I promise you.
Okay. I'm Willie.
Don't laugh.
Consciousness always had to be, right? Or there couldn't be a movement that would cause anything to happen.
That would be the argument, right? Otherwise, you would just have stasis.
Yeah.
Correct. And consciousness, part of the descriptor of consciousness is aliveness and the word that we had struggled with last week, which is desire. And we talked about impulse. Otherwise, you literally just have ising. Hang on, we've got one back there, and then we're gonna.
I'll make this brief. So I think the beauty of being at this point of learning about the universe and the way it operates and the functions of it is because before we even came into existence, it was existing, right? And then we get to understand the depthness of it itself as it is, right? And then once we finally do get into that component, we know this powerful source that is the I am.
Yes.
And then we can finally get to us where we are coming to play.
What she said. All right, everybody go home and think about it. Rest your brain. You know, it's all good. And of course, we're always using language that categorizes and separates for something that's a one. We're just stuck with it, so we just do the best we can. Hold it lightly, play with it in your heart and your mind and in your consciousness and see what is revealed. So great to be with all of you. We do have our celebration Sunday today. We are closing in on the end of our pledge program. If you are out there watching us on a regular basis for Sunday mornings here in the Science of Mind class, we do ask you to make a pledge to make sure that we are consistently here to be with you online, to be with you guys here in the room. We just love it. I just love that you love this so much. I love that you're all nerds like me. I love that so much. It's so great. Have a beautiful Sunday. Bye for now.